Good evening. We're here to talk about stories, specifically all of our stories.
Oh, I love story time.
Yeah, so he narrates a lot in the beginning of episode 3 and 4, so we're going to talk about those episodes, what he's talking about. And so let's start with 3, where he tells a story via coffee machine.
Okay.
And it's called The Poor Woodcutter and His Wife. And he's telling the story to his wife, Melanie, interestingly enough.
Very
We don't know that at the time.
Melanie Bird.
Oh, yeah, matches the crane. So in this story, the crane is in some type of, I don't remember, some type of danger. They help the crane. Crane comes back as a human, asks for a loom and to stay with them, makes them rich through whatever it's weaving, but says, hey, don't look at me while I'm working, and curiosity gets the better of them. They look, the crane flies away.
Very interesting. And I think you did some research, right, onto where this story comes from?
Yeah, it's a Japanese folktale.
Okay.
The title I saw online translated more like the crane's returning of a favor. So that emphasizes the beginning part where they help the crane out and then the crane helps them out. It's more about returning your obligation. And when the crane changes back, that's less a cautionary tale, more of a return to the natural order, because a crane can't be a human forever.
Oh, so very interesting. So it's less, don't open Pandora's box, don't be that curious cat, and more just, you do me a solid, I do you a solid, and we're good.
Yeah, but okay. I think Legion kind of emphasizes that don't look behind the curtain part of the story. I think that it kind of mirrors what's going on with David in the episode and a little bit before, where they're trying to figure out what's going on in David's head. Okay. There's glitches. He's keeping them out. So the Shadow King's rewriting the memories, but they don't know that. So they sedate him and try to see what's going on. They're peeking in the door, and he doesn't fly away like the crane, but he does crawl away to the vents. Yeah, to the astral plane.
That's right.
And he's lost. He's gone, just like the crane's gone at the end of that story.
Okay, so yeah, David is kind of like the crane or the loom in this instance.
Well, yeah, maybe. I don't know. His brain's the loom, maybe.
Perhaps. Okay, so that's interesting. What about the stories in episode 4?
Yeah, so 4, there's 2 stories and a prologue. And the prologue is about human nature.
Human nature.
Figure your shit out. He talks about the nature of violence and how ignorance leads to violence, which contrasts a lot with episode 3, because episode 3, hey, don't be curious. Episode 4, you need to figure out what's going on.
Right. And implies some sort of like reconciliation there too, if you figure it out, right?
Yeah, which I think is a little bit of a misdirect, because in the end, David can't actually reconcile with the Shadow King, but at that point, you kind of get the feeling that he needs to figure out what's happening in his brain, and then once he figures it out, there'll be one happy family and super powerful together.
Right, and that's referenced later on in the season when when the Shadow King in the form of Lenny says, we could have been, so powerful together, and then that girlfriend of yours came into the picture.
Yeah, and then when they're in the red room together talking, like, hey, look what we can do together.
Right. That's a really good, that's really interesting. I mean, it's kind of funny too that Oliver says that, right? Because in terms of reconciliation, I mean, maybe he's got his own things that he needs to reconcile. He has his own stuff.
You gotta figure your shit out, Oliver. Yeah. You got the Shadow King at the end.
Yeah, and obviously that's gonna, that story will play out in season 2. But I do wonder if maybe there is more reconciliation between those two,
I don't know.
Or not.
So the other stories, let's move on to the other stories. One, they're less stories and more archetypes of stories. One is empathy, Fluffy Bunny overcoming obstacles, and the other is fear. Don't go close to the ocean. And then he kind of combines the two. He says tonight's play, or I guess you're referencing this episode, is about a fluffy bunny who gets too close to the ocean. I kind of think that's Sid. Sid is the cute fluffy bunny.
Makes sense.
She's going on an adventure, a mission to figure out what David's past. And then she runs into the ocean, trouble, in the form of Division 3.
Right, and yeah, I think that makes total sense because also, I mean, within the frame of that episode, it's very much told from Sid's point of view, right? I mean, most of the scenes are actually about her and her adventure.
Yeah, she has a lot of voiceover or narration in this episode, which you don't see in other episodes, you know, especially when you're coming back from the commercial breaks.
Right, and on that point of Sid too, I also find really fascinating is that when Oliver's speaking about empathy and fear, Sid is empathy, right? She represents empathy, not just via her relationship with David as his girlfriend, but also through her superpowers. Her power literally allows her to walk in someone else's shoes, and that's why she's able to experience what David experienced, which is empathy. Her power is literally empathy.
That makes sense.
And she can see the Shadow King as well, right? No one else can except for David.
And I guess the Shadow King is
right.
more like fear.
Yeah, so Shadow King is fear, and you have the
angriest boy,
the demon with the yellow eyes.
Yeah, it's a lot of David acting scared in bed too.
Yeah, so there's that pairing between Sid and the Shadow King, and that's a theme that's expressed, I guess, through Oliver, through the narration, and then throughout the story as well.
And I think that the story. So I talked about Sid. That kind of be a frame for Sid. Sid's journey in that episode, but I do think maybe we're supposed to think more about empathy and fear because you have that pairing where David's trying to figure out which one do I choose, obviously Sid. And then there's other pairings. You have Sid and Ptonomy. They're both investigating David's past. Sid is being more empathetic, thinking maybe, memories were implanted. He's a good person.
Yeah.
And she's in love with him, and love involves empathy. Whereas Ptonomy is more on the fear side. He thinks David is dangerous.
Dangerous is a better word. Look.
He thinks Sid is kind of blinded by her love.
He's constantly questioning why David is so important to Summerlin. Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another pairing, too, is potentially between Summerlin and Division 3. Right?
Yes,
Summerlin being empathy, Division 3 being fear.
Yeah. With Melanie psychoanalyzing him, trying to understand him, definitely more empathetic, right?
Right.
And trying to make him be whole as a human being. Whereas Division 3 reacts with fear. They're tense around him. They put him in the swimming pool, surround him with guns. Right. And that also ties in with what Oliver was saying in his prologue.
In other words, is
where violence is rooted in ignorance. They don't know what David is, so they react with guns and violence.
Right. That's That's a really good point. I also think what's kind of interesting too on the note of Division 3 is the interesting montage of Clark on the final
recovery,
episode.
You see his family.
Yeah, really bizarre. I mean, clearly that was meant to, I guess, for the audience member to express empathy towards him in Division 3. I think that's pretty clear. But then I think that thread is then, carried over through for David as well. David also makes that choice later on in that episode to empathize, to react with empathy towards Division 3. He wants to talk to Clark instead of, and potentially negotiate and understand where he's coming from.
So we have this.
Yeah.
So we have this divide between empathy and fear, but then in this case, there's a little more blurring of what we're supposed to feel, and that kind of reminds me of this interview that Noah Hawley did, where he talks about one of his favorite things about the X-Men series is there's a lot of moral gray. You have Professor X and Magneto, who were set up to get in conflicts with each other, but it's not necessarily true that one of them is always right and one of them is always wrong. One of them is always the villain.
What I have always really loved about the X-Men is that question of should I do good or should I do evil is not resolved once and for all. Yep. You know what I mean? And you see it with Fassbender or that character, Magneto.
Right. That makes sense, and that's actually why personally I like the X-Men growing up as a kid too.
Yeah, so maybe that example of Clark is him bringing moral gray into his X-Men universe.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, those stories, I think in the beginning when we encounter them first time watching, they kind of throw us off. You know, I called the fourth one kind of misdirect. We don't really know what's going on, but then they do provide a framework for us to understand the episode and think about the themes. So I think that's really cool what they did.
Yeah.
What they were able to accomplish.
It is pretty cool. And we figured some stuff out.
Yeah, we figured shit out. Yeah. We didn't figure out, are you empathy or are you fear? Which one are you?
I'm a mix.
You're
More
a mix?
fear than anything.
I'm a mix. Yeah, I guess.